Hi, my name's Joe, and welcome to the second edition of Self-Sufficient Pat. Today we're going to be talking about tomatoes, pruning and suckering tomatoes. I'm going to show you a little bit about how I do it. I don't claim to be an expert. I enjoy gardening. I've done it for a while. I think I'm fairly good at it, but by no means am I a horticulturalist or an expert.
What you're looking at here on the screen is my garden from last year. Actually, you're looking at my whole garden. What you're seeing in the background, though, are my tomatoes. This is probably mid-July, maybe early July. At this point, the tomatoes are about shoulder height, maybe head height. You can see they're very healthy, dark green, lush vines. Later in the season, they were just dripping with bright red and orange tomatoes. These are all Brandywines, an heirloom variety. And what happened was towards the end of the year, right before harvest, when the tomatoes on the plants were looking their best, my tomatoes contracted late blight, and it really devastated my crop. I basically got 3 or 4 tomatoes out of my garden last year. I actually ended up having to throw away about 80 gallons. That's 16 5-gallon buckets of tomatoes. Had to chop my tomato vines to the ground, burnt the vast majority of my tomato vines. And so this year we're going to do what we can to avoid that. I got some information from a magazine called Backwoods Magazine. You'll find a link below in the show notes about how to prune your tomatoes, how to reduce their susceptibility to late blight. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going to look at today.
So that's why I'm doing this, just trying to avoid that late blight. Let's go out to the garden and show you how we do this, how I do this, and we'll go from there.
Well, I was going to do a video today on how to sucker tomatoes and how to prune your tomatoes to avoid late blight and to simulate growth. But it looks like I was about 15 minutes too late, maybe 20 minutes too late. The rain's pouring down, the thunder's roaring. That's good for the plants, going to get some water on the plants, but not so good for suckering. The way it's coming down, the garden may be too wet to get into tomorrow too, so we may have to wait a bit before we get to do this video. Well, we're back out in the garden. It's about 5 minutes after the last video. And typical western Pennsylvania weather. If you don't like the weather, just wait a minute. So it's still raining around us. The thunder's still a little bit present. But we're going to go ahead and try this, and if we get rained out, then we get rained out. So I'm no expert on this. I'm not trying to do this to show you exactly the textbook way of suckering and pruning tomatoes, but I am going to go through and do my tomatoes, and I'll share with you the way I'm doing it anyway. Last year I had about the same number of tomato plants. At the end of the season they were all about 6 feet tall, beautiful red and orange tomatoes on them. These are all Brandywines and beefsteaks, all heirlooms. Last year I had all Brandywines, and I got hit with late blight. And I got, I think, about 3 tomatoes out of my garden last year, but I had to throw over 80 gallons of tomatoes, 16 5-gallon buckets of tomatoes away because of late blight. So this year we're going to try to do some things differently to prevent that. So the first thing let's do is show you how to sucker tomatoes, or at least how I sucker tomatoes. Again, I'm no horticulturalist, but I'm going to try to show you the way I do it. So the way I understand it, we get in here and we look at the base of any and all of our leaf stems. And our goal here is to get rid of the suckers. We've got new growth coming on some of these plants. And I'm looking down here and I see already some very large suckers, suckers that are quite large actually. I'm a little bit concerned here because some of these are suckers that are already starting to bloom, and that means that cutting them off is going to take away some growth. Well, we're going to run an experiment here. We're going to sucker a couple of these and not sucker a couple of these. And we're going to see what that does for us. I gotta say, although I believe this is good and proper and right, and the best idea I have to prevent late blight this year, does make me a little nervous. We're taking off a good bit of growth here. I do know that air circulation is one of the primary ways to avoid blight, but man, it does make me nervous. Here are a couple of definite small suckers that we can take off. Don't even really need the pruners for those. We can just pop those off. You do want to sucker below any blooms that are present. You don't want to sucker up there where you've got bloom happening. Boy, this just makes me nervous. But they say it's the right thing to do, so that's what we're going to do, at least on most of them. We may leave a couple out as a control group. But by and large, we're going to sucker these tomatoes. We're just going to bite the bullet and do it. I'm also going to take out some of these lower stems that are on the ground. It concerns me because they're going to hold moisture, and I'm concerned that they're going to... Moisture is your enemy here as far as late blight goes, so I'm concerned that they would give me problems. Like right here, see those leaves on the ground there? Don't like that very much, so we're going to take those off. We may pay for it, it may damage our plant, but last year we had to throw away, again, 80 gallons of tomatoes, and that just made me heartsick. So we're going to try to avoid that if at all possible this year. And I may be over pruning it. You know, we'll find out. We'll see how this does versus our control group, and we'll see how things turn out. Boy, that just makes me uncomfortable. So, there's one. We're going to leave that one next to it as a control group. If this one does fine, we'll come back and do that one again. We're not going to wait till the end of the year till that one has blight to say, okay, this works. So we're going to try this. We'll see. On to the next plant. See, this technically, here's the main shoot coming out of the tomato. That means that this is, technically speaking, a sucker, but it's also got good growth going on. I hate to call that. Let's go down here a little bit lower on the plant and take some of these that are a little lower first. I'm not saying we won't come back and take the others, but let's take these first. Another reason for doing this is that these suckers, you're talking about a lot of green growth here. These suckers take an awful lot of the plant's energy, and will result in fewer fruit. See, this is down on the ground. That's not a sucker, but it is down on the ground. Here we take off some of this lower growth. Leave some of those sun-collecting leaves. Let's pull out some of this plantain, some of this weeds while we're down here. Do a little weed and feed. Now I am going to pull most of these suckers out. I'm not going to weed and feed those. There's no good reason to. I can't explain to you why I'm doing it, but it makes me nervous from a blight perspective. So I am going to go ahead and compost these. They have no blight on them now, so there's not really any concern. I wouldn't feel comfortable composting blighted leaves because my compost bins, you can see them right over there, aren't large enough to get hot enough to kill the blight. Now they say blight can't overwinter in western Pennsylvania. The cold kills it. That said, I am blight phobic at this point. I get the shivers a little bit just hearing the word blight. So we're going to do everything we can to keep blight out of here. I'm going to go ahead and prune about half of these plants, and then we'll come back later and see what that does for us.
After watching that footage that we just looked at, it occurs to me that it could probably benefit from some diagrams, some graphics that show you exactly what a sucker is as opposed to a tomato stem. If time allows, I will come back and do that on a later video. For right now, given the time of year, I think it's important that I get this out now because right now is when people need to know this. I do want to apologize a little bit for the obviously poor lighting conditions, the poor audio on the in the garden segment there. Understand that I am still working this out. I am still experimenting with hardware and software and ways to make this look and sound better. It will improve, but for now, I just want to get the information out there, and we'll work on the technical aspects and the aesthetics, if you will, afterwards. Please take a moment, and if you got something out of this video, or you enjoyed it, or you're looking forward to future videos, take a minute and click on the like button, the thumbs up button down below. And also, if you have a chance, please hit the subscribe button so you can be alerted for future webcasts or videos. Also, if you look here on the right, on your left, you'll see a video to my first, link to my first video on spring gobbler season, a little bit of hunting with my daughter and I. If you have a moment, please go over and check that out. Thanks again, and I'll be back to you in about a week.